All right, welcome back to Seneca's Letters to Lucilius. We are on, what letter are we on today? It is letter 56, actually. And this is on quiet and study. In verse 1, he says here, "Beshrew me if I think anything more requisite than silence for a man who secludes himself in order to study. Imagine what a variety of noises reverberates about my ears. I have lodgings right over a bathing establishment, so picture yourself the assortment of sounds which are strong enough to make me hate my very powers of hearing. When you strenuous gentlemen, for when you strenuous gentlemen, for example, when your strenuous gentleman, for example, is exercising himself by flourishing leaden weights, when he is working hard or else pretends to be working hard, I can hear him grunt, and whenever he releases his imprisoned breath, I can hear him panting in wheezy and high-pitched tones. Or perhaps some lazy fellow content with a cheap rub down, and hear the crack of the pummeling hand on his shoulder, varying in sound according as the hand is laid on flat or hollow. Then perhaps a professional comes along, shouting out the score that is the finishing touch." So here in verse 1, he's basically just talking about all the sounds, obviously, that he has to deal with. And he's saying that, you know, basically, it's smart for a man to seclude himself into silence in order to study. Okay, he says, "Beshrew me if I think anything more requisite than silence for a man who secludes himself in order to study." So, in order to study, you need some silence. Is what he's saying. But he's saying, imagine all the stuff that I'm hearing. All right. He says in verse 2. Add to this the arresting of an occasional roisterer or pickpocket, the racket of the man who always likes to hear his own voice in the bathroom, or the enthusiast who plunges into the swimming tank with unconscionable noise and splashing. Besides all those voices, if nothing else are good, imagine the hair plucker with his penetrating shrill voice for purposes of advertisement, continually giving it vent and never holding his tongue except when he is plucking the armpits and making his victims yell instead. Then the cake seller, with his varied cries, the sausage man, the confectioner, and all the vendors of food hawking their wares, each with his own distinctive intonation. Okay, so there's a lot of examples that he's giving here of a lot of different sounds that are disturbing. So let's see what he has to say about this. In verse 3, he says, "So you say, what iron nerves or deadened ears you must have, if your mind can hold out amid so many noises, so various and so discordant, that when our friend Chrysippus is brought to his death by the continual good morrows that greet him. But I assure you that this racket means no more to me than the sound of waves or falling water, although you will remind me that a certain tribe once moved their city merely because they could not endure the din of a Nile cataract." Okay, so what he's saying here is he's saying, yeah, you must be like, wow, you have to have iron nerves or you can't hear anything if you can just still be able to study amid so much noise. And he said, Chrysippus, he couldn't even stand all the people greeting him good morning, right? So what he's saying is look, here's the deal. It's like nothing. It's like falling water or waves to me, right? Even though, yeah, I know that's a problem. I mean, an entire tribe moved because they couldn't stand the noise on the Nile, right, of the cataracts, right? So let's see what he has to say here. In verse 4, "Words seem to distract me more than noises, for words demand attention, but noises merely fill the ears and beat upon them. Among the sounds that din round me without distracting, I include passing carriages, a machinist in the same block, a saw sharpener nearby, or some fellow who is demonstrating with little pipes and flutes the trickling fountain, shouting rather than singing." So again, he's saying here that, giving some examples, but he's saying that, look, it's not the sounds, it's words. Words are the things that actually disturb me because they have some kind of meaning. I can ignore all this other stuff. Furthermore, an intermittent noise upsets me more than a steady one. But by this time, I have toughened my nerves against all that sort of thing, so that I can endure even a boatswain making the time in high-pitched tones for his crew. For I force my mind to concentrate and keep it from straying to things outside itself. All outdoors may be bedlam, provided there is no disturbance within, provided that fear is not wrangling with desire in my breast, provided that meanness and lavishness are not at odds, one harassing the other. For what benefit is a quiet neighborhood if our emotions are in uproar? So he's kind of redirecting this here, and what he's saying is he's saying, look, intermittent noises might upset me more than a steady one, but even those things I can endure. It's not a problem at all, okay? Because I force my mind to concentrate, right, and keep it from straying to things outside, right? And he says that it doesn't matter what noises or disturbances are going outside as long as I'm not wrangling with desire in my breast, right? So as long as I don't have this turmoil going on inside me that is actually making me be distracted, right? So what he's saying here, which I think is really important, is that if you have peace inside you, if you're not struggling with this turmoil inside you, if you've become more stoic in that way, then the outside things aren't going to bother you, but they will bother you more if you are dealing with internal struggles, because then it's going to distract you and it's going to make you think about those things as opposed to doing the work that you're trying to do. In verse 6, he says, "'Twas night, and all the world was lulled to rest." He's quoting here. And he says, "This is not true, for no real rest can be found when reason has not done the lulling. Night brings our troubles to the light rather than banishes them. It merely changes the form of our worries. For even when we seek slumber, our sleepless moments are as harassing as the daytime. Real tranquility is the state reached by an unperverted mind when it is relaxed." So he's saying here that people say that nighttime brings rest, but that's not actually true. He said that you can't actually have that kind of rest unless reason has caused it, right? Which means that essentially that the night, it just changes the form. In fact, you start worrying at night, right? That's when you start thinking about your day and thinking about all the problems that you have. And that's not good. That doesn't help. It's just as bad as during the daytime. He's saying that real tranquility is reached by an unperverted mind when it is relaxed, right? So kind of the goal of philosophy here, right? And verse 7, he says, "Think of the unfortunate man who courts sleep by surrendering his spacious mansion to silence, who, that his ear may be disturbed by no sound, bids the whole retinue of his slaves be quiet, and that whoever approaches him shall walk on tiptoe. He tosses from this side to that and seeks a fitful slumber amid his frettings." Okay? So he's given this description of this guy that, lives in this mansion, and he's basically trying to get some relaxation, right? And he's made everyone be quiet, right? So he says, he complains that he has heard sounds when he has not heard them at all. The reason, you ask? His soul is in an uproar. It must be soothed, and its rebellious murmuring checked. You need not suppose that the soul is at peace when the body is still. Sometimes quiet means disquiet. Okay, so again, he's saying that in this particular scenario, the guy thinks he's hearing noises, and the reason why is because he's disturbed internally. Okay, so that's really the thing that's disturbing him. We think it's the outside world sometimes when it is the internal. We must therefore rouse ourselves to action and busy ourselves with interests that are good as often as we are in the grasp of uncontrollable sluggishness. So he's saying that the cure to this is actually to take action, to start doing things. Let's find out why. He says in verse 9, "Great generals, when they see that their men are mutinous, check them by some sort of labor or keep them busy with small forays. The much occupied man has no time for wantonness, and it is an obvious commonplace that the evils of leisure can be shaken off by hard work. Although people may often have thought that I sought seclusion because I was disgusted with politics and regretted my hapless and thankless position, yet in the retreat to which apprehension and weariness have driven me, my ambition sometimes develops afresh. For it is not my ambition was rooted out that it has abated, but because it was wearied or perhaps even put out of temper by the failure of its plans." So a couple of important points here, right? So he's saying that, look, even generals, like great generals, when they have a mutinous crew that's causing trouble, men in their army, they'll give them some labor, or they'll keep them busy, right? Because he says an occupied man, he doesn't have any time for any of this stuff. The evils of leisure can be shaken off by hard work. So remember this, is that if you get to work, it'll solve a lot of your problems. It'll keep you from doing the wrong things, right? And he says that in his case, a lot of people thought he sought seclusion because he was disgusted with politics and and not being thanked for his position. But he says here, the retreat that he sought here, right? In that retreat, he actually has ambition. Sometimes it develops afresh, so it can't be that. So he says it's not that his ambition here that was rooted out and abated, okay, but maybe it was wearied or put out, like reduced, because of the failure of its plan. So he wasn't able to, that ambition, that desire that he had, he could never achieve it, which nobody can, as he's talked about before. And so maybe that's the reason why he went into seclusion. All right. And he says here in verse 10, and so with luxury also, which sometimes seems to have departed, and then when we have made a profession of frugality, begins to fret us, and amid our economies seeks the pleasure which we have merely left but not condemned. Indeed, the more stealthy it comes, the greater its force. For all unconcealed vices are less serious. A disease also is farther on the road to being cured when it breaks forth from concealment and manifests its power. So with greed, ambition, and other evils of the mind, you may be sure that they do most harm when they're hidden behind a pretense of soundness. All right, so breaking this one down, we'll have to go a little slowly on this one. So let's start here. And so with luxury also, which sometimes seems to have departed, and then we have made a profession of frugality, begins to fret us, and amid our economies seeks the pleasures which we have merely left but not condemned. Okay, so he's saying here with luxury also, okay, and sometimes that seems to have departed, right? And we've started to become frugal, okay? It's that luxury, that feeling for luxury, still begins to fret us, okay? Despite what we're doing, it seeks the pleasures we have merely left but not condemned. So, do you see what he's saying here? He's saying that you may have thought you've escaped from some of these vices, right? But what's happened is you've just left them. You haven't actually condemned them. And so they're going to start to stir up, even when you're on the right path, all right? And he says the more stealthily it comes, the greater its force, okay, when it sneaks up on you. Because he says that these unconcealed vices, they're less serious, right? Because if you have a disease, you're further on the road to having it cured when it's not concealed, when you know that it's there. And so all of these things, greed, ambition, and other evils of the mind, they do the most harm when you don't know they're there. Being aware of the things is key. Men think that we are in retirement, and yet we are not. For if we had sincerely retired and have sounded the signal for retreat and have scorned outward attractions, then, as I remarked above, no outward thing will distract us. No music of men or of birds can interrupt good thoughts when they have once become steadfast and sure. So he's saying, look, people think that you have accomplished the goal, that you're retired, right? As he says, to be a philosopher. But nope, you haven't sincerely retired. I'll tell you why. Okay. He says, because when you actually have, then what will happen is all of those outward attractions, you'll scorn them. Okay. Nothing will distract you. No music of men or birds. Okay. Because your mind will be steadfast and sure. Okay. And so he's saying that's the case, actually. In verse 12, the mind which starts at words or at chance sounds is unstable and has not yet withdrawn into itself. It contains within itself an element of anxiety and rooted fear, and this makes one prey to care, as our Virgil says, as he quotes Virgil here. I, whom of yore no dart could cause to flee, nor Greeks with crowded lines of infantry. Now shake at every sound and fear the air, both for my child and for the load I bear. All right. So he's saying here in this verse that the mind which starts at words or at chance sounds, okay? So the mind that these things are making you think is unstable and has not yet withdrawn in itself. So if you hear a sound, if that sets you off, it's because you're unstable, right? So think about anxiety, right? People are like, what is that noise? What is that thing? What's that, right? That's what he's talking about here, okay? He says it contains within itself an element of anxiety and rooted fear. That makes one prey to care, right? So if you have anxiety, if you're worried about things, if certain things in the environment trouble you, it's showing that you've still got that fear in you. In verse 13, he says, this man in his first state is wise. He blenches neither at the brandished spear, nor at the clashing armor of the serried foe, nor at the din of the stricken city. This man is in his second state. The man in his second state lacks knowledge, fearing for his own concerns. He pales at every sound. Any cry is taken for the battle shout and overthrows him. The slightest disturbance renders him breathless with fear. It is a load that makes him afraid. So what he's saying here is that, the man in this first state, he doesn't care that all this stuff could be going on. The city could literally be being attacked, and he's not disturbed by this. Okay. But he's saying the man in the second state, every sound, every cry, everything is interpreted as something's coming to get him, or something is bad is happening. Okay. He's full of this fear, and it's the load that makes him afraid. It's this internal emotional load that is what's causing this fear. In verse 14, he says, select anyone you please from among your favorites of fortune, trailing their many responsibilities, carrying their many burdens, and you will behold a picture of Virgil's hero, fearing both for his child and for the load he bears. Right? So he's saying here, whoever you can imagine who's been blessed by fortune, okay? If you look and they're carrying all these burdens, you will see that they are full of fear. You may therefore be sure that you are at peace with yourself when no noise reaches you, when no word shakes you out of yourself, whether it be of flattery or of threat, or merely an empty sound buzzing about you with unmeaning din. So he's saying, here's how you know that you've actually achieved the peace and tranquility and have reached that internal state that we're talking about of tranquility, right? He's saying that when nothing bothers you, okay, whether it be a flattery, right, someone gives you a compliment, or a threat that's not going to throw you off, all right, or just empty sounds, all right? So it's more than just ignoring the noises. It's that nothing is bothering your peace, even if people threaten you. In verse 15, he finishes up by saying, what then, you say? Is it not sometimes a simpler matter to just avoid the uproar? I admit this. Accordingly, I shall change from my present quarters. I merely wish to test myself and to give myself practice. Why need I be tormented any longer when Ulysses found so simple a cure for his comrades, even against the songs of the sirens' farewell? So what he's talking about here is he says, okay, look, so yeah, do I need to be in a noisy environment? No, I don't. I just was here to test myself, but obviously, why be there when you don't need to? Why purposely make things more difficult on yourself? So, but he says that, Ulysses, he found a simple cure for his comrades, which basically he had them stuff wax in their ears so they wouldn't hear the siren song and jump off the boat and go to their deaths. So anyway, this is a good letter here. It's a fairly long one, but really the gist of this is that these sounds, any kind of disturbances, any kind of thing that's coming from the outside world, if it's disturbing you, the reason why is because internally you're disturbed, right? Internally, you do not have the tranquility that you're seeking at this point. And so stop focusing on the outside. Stop focusing on thinking that these noises or these distractions or things that's what's stopping you. It's not. It's actually you. It's actually you and what you've got going on internally. So when you hear the external and you feel like that's disturbing you, focus on the internal and fix those problems. I'll see you next week.